Hey, welcome to Chicago, and welcome to the University of Chicago, and importantly for us, we are so grateful that you are helping make our Institute of Politics conference so special. I had a chance just to visit with the students a little while ago, and I'm not dissing on any of our presenters or any of the folks, but the star of this show is every student who's in this room. It is every opportunity that they have to connect, every opportunity that they have to learn, and then hopefully, in my world, connect in such a way that this is something that they want to do, that they want to commit their lives to, whether it's in research, like our next two presenters, or whether it is in practice by running a school board or a park board, or whether it is just in convening people in their local community in ways that make a difference. And to me, the absolute critical moment, I recently met with some rural students here at the University of Chicago, and one moment that broke my heart, I didn't tell them that it broke my heart when they said it, but I was trying to talk about a program that we have here in Chicago, which is called Hometown Internships, and we're trying to basically address what we call the brain drain by making sure that students who are here, who are getting a first-class education, and first-class education in all of your institutions, feel like there's opportunity back home, feel like they have an opportunity to contribute. And one student, I said, don't you want to go back home and work maybe in the mayor's office or work in a nonprofit? She said, my dad told me never to come back. And why is that? Because of opportunity, because of culture, because of the lack of parity in terms of wage. What is it that even people who come from places like I come from, and just give you a little background, former senator from the state of North Dakota, grew up in it, yeah, there you go. You hear that? There you go. And I tell people, I grew up in a town of 90 people. And people say 90,000. I said, no, 90. My family was 1/10 the population of my town. And so I think I come to this goal honestly. And I come understanding that for too long in America, what has been happening is we're pointing the finger at each other. Whether it is the cab driver in New York that apparently single-handedly is tearing down the fabric of our country, or whether it's the farmer who is not contributing in a way that the system would provide. And so we're not really seeing each other. And this is happening all over among all kinds of groups, but one of the areas that we think is not well addressed is the urban-rural kind of image problem. And so we hope to dive a little bit into that in this conference. We hope to have great presenters so you guys can maybe get some food for thought, but mainly what we hope is that you all, whether you come from Chicago, or whether you come from LA, or whether you come from a little town of Matador, North Dakota, or whether you are enrolled on White Earth Indian Reservation in Minnesota, that you will find common purpose and a common American identity. And so I want to thank you all for coming. We'll be here for 2.5 days or 1.5 days after this evening. And we think that hopefully as we think about that next step, we're never about one and done at the Institute of Politics. We don't necessarily think that it's our job to admire the problem. We think it's our job to find practical solutions for solving the problem. So thank you all for coming. Thank you all for bringing your students for the most part. Thank you, students. I hope you had a great trip around Chicago. How did that go? Was it good? Hey, all right, whether you were pink or green or blue or wherever Purvey assigned you. So take care, you guys, and we will see you and be around the entire conference if you want to visit with me. Hey, sister. Come on up.
Thank you, Heidi. Now please welcome to the stage our first panel of this conference is the Urban-Rural Divide, a Real Thing, with Daniel Shea and Nicholas Jacobs, co-authors of The Rural Voter, The Politics of Place and Disuniting of America.
Well, first, thank you. Thank you for the organizers, the senator. What a wonderful idea. What a really important event. We're so grateful to be here. You've been wonderful. Thank you all for coming. Right? It's really a privilege to be here. But we have sort of, first things first, is why are we here? Why are there so many students? If you're like a Colby students, you're busy. This is a busy time of year, right? There's a lot of resources that are dedicated to this event. Many of you have come from across the country. Why would we do that? Why would we spend 2 days thinking about the urban-rural divide? Well, something's happened. There's a change that's happening in America. If you don't mind, I'll start with a real brief anecdote from our book, how we open our book, The Rural Voter. See, Nick and I are a little bit different in that we are rural academics. That's pretty rare. And we're rural academics who study rural politics. So Nick's about 20 minutes from Waterville. I'm about a half an hour. Waterville is a city, nothing like Chicago. It would be a neighborhood in Chicago, but in central Maine, it's a city. And here's what's interesting. When Nick leaves his house, and I leave the little cute hamlet of Mount Vernon, and we drive into Waterville, the people on the way and the people in the town are a lot the same, right? Demographically the same. There's not a lot of diversity in central Maine, right? The incomes are about the same. The schools are about the same, right? There's a tremendous similarity, but here's what's different. When we cross that bridge into Waterville, the little city, it turns blue, right? Out just beyond the bridge, it's all red. So something's happening in America. So those explanations that we might grab to of dislocation of job and poor schools, it kind of doesn't work. Something else is going on, and it is, we think, an unprecedented change. So that's a term that I threw around a lot in the early days of writing the book. And Nick is nothing if not empirically careful. He said, no, wait a second, we can't say unprecedented until we know for sure that it's unprecedented. So we had a bunch of Colby students help us for 2 summers collect data at the county level all the way back to 1824. So we could chart this difference. And what you could see here is that horizontal line is the mean Democratic performance in presidential elections. The dark line are rural voters, rural counties. And what we see throughout American history is it sort of ebbs and flows and bops around. Sometimes it helps the Republicans, sometimes the rural vote helps Democrats. But then about 1980, all things change. That's what we're talking about. We've got a lot of figures in our book, maybe too many, but I think this is one of the most important. There's a big change that's happening, right? Our friends at Pew just 2 days ago, I think they released this data just for this conference, Nick. I'm sure we got them to do that. So this is attitudinal data. This is a measure of party identification, how you feel about parties. So what we see in urban counties is, yes, they are blue, and that is part of the divide, right? 20 years ago, about 58% of urban residents considered themselves Democrats. It's a little higher now, but take a look at the far right, right? 20 years ago in the mid-90s, about 51% of rural residents considered themselves Republican. Now that's above 60%. And you know, it's not just, as the senator could tell us, it's not just at the presidential level, right? It's happening in the House, and it's happening in the Senate, right? We see this bifurcation. It is an unprecedented change that we're seeing. We take a good look at state legislatures. So the solid line on top is mostly rural states, and this is state legislatures. Who would have guessed that back in the 1980s, most state legislators would be from rural districts? I'm sorry, most Democratic state legislators would be from rural districts, and that has changed dramatically since the 1980s. So we're divided. It's something that we've all come to live with. We start thinking about it. We see this map often, on election night in particular, but there might be something else that's going on, and that is a growing distrust, a growing cynicism. Election returns are one thing, it's sympathy and empathy for the other side is something else. And it works in both directions, right? It works in both directions. So there is something happening in America, and we think it's really important. Now, here's a question. Is this change just something for the practitioners, for the handicappers, right? For the campaign consultants? You need to understand the urban-rural divide to get to the magic electoral college number, or to win the Senate race, or win the state legislative race. Are we here for these 2 days because we're worried about election outcomes, or something much deeper in American politics, something much more fundamental in American politics? I think that we are, and my colleague is going to help us explain our perspective on this issue.
Thanks. So is there a rural-urban divide? You betcha. I can't do the accent, I'm sorry. There's no denying it, right? You have grown up so accustomed to those maps and figures that every 4 and 2 years show how not only we are divided politically, but how we are divided geographically, okay? But one thing I'd like to think about when we look at those gaps at the presidential level, or we look at those gaps in the state houses, or in the Senate contest, is those gaps historically are quite new. It's not inevitable. Those gaps have been constructed over long periods of time, which means they can be deconstructed. And that's why Dan and I wrote this book. As academics, we are great at contextualizing and then contextualizing the contextualization. And we need you to help us look forward in how we can reverse these trends that are they don't have to exist. You have a choice. You can lean into the stereotypes. You can ask the questions about who's to blame for our political divides. Or you can ask the questions about why our institutions and our political systems are set up in such a way that leaves so many people unheard and unseen on both sides of the political divide. Because the stereotypes cut in both directions. Now, Dan and I are scholars of rural politics. And we went out and we gave rural residents a choice in how they wanted to define themselves by asking thousands and thousands of rural Americans what it was that was motivating their political decisions, why they were voting the way they did, why they were thinking about issues the way they did. And we drew a comparative sample of urban and suburban residents too. And look, we wrote a book on the rural-urban divide. We're here to bridge divides. But we might want to start with some basic facts that a lot of that divide is in our heads. Let's think about one of the most pressing divides in addition to the rural-urban divide, how the rural-urban divide gets mapped on to the racial divide in this country. When we ask white rural residents a set of questions about how the economy is doing, whether kids growing up in your community and you're going to have a better life than your parents, whether or not kids are going to have to leave their community in order to have productive lives. The community does not get their fair share from government. Right? Overwhelming majorities of white rural residents tell us they are pessimistic about their future, and yet would not move away if given the chance. And we see the same thing across the rural-urban divide. We see the same sense of pessimism among urban residents who say, very few who agree with the idea that kids growing up in their community are going to have a better life than their parents. A majority that also say, My kids are going to have to leave in order to live a productive life. And similar degrees of resentment and distrust towards government that say we don't get our fair share, and yet an enduring love of place. A desire to stay, a desire to remain, a desire to protect what makes their communities special. Now, that's not to deny that there aren't specific challenges confronting rural America, but it's not the challenges you might have heard, that rural America is broken because they're hooked on Fox, we're all unemployed and underserved by government, or we're all in our basements clicking away on our computer on conspiracy theories. We're the most likely group in society to actually say that news is irrelevant to my community and not follow national news at all. We're the most likely to say that you can still get by with hard work. And we're no more or less likely to believe in conspiracy theories or display violent tendencies than any other segment in American society. Now, those facts, I think, and those specific ideas about rurality lead to a certain set of challenges we see. It's not that we're all hooked on Fox. It's that there's this distrust in media. Where we see this value in meritocracy and hard work, we recognize that this might lead rural residents to undervalue the role of systemic racism and institutional barriers to social mobility. And although we and multiple scholars have never found any evidence to back up the idea that rural residents are more violent prone or driven by conspiracies, we acknowledge and have to acknowledge that rural people are increasingly motivated by the idea that urban people simply don't value the rural way of life. Getting it right matters. And asking the right set of questions over the next set of days matters. Questions that we think lead us to see more commonalities between rural and urban people than differences. The rural-urban political divide that Dan mapped out exists for a reason. It exists because there are rage peddlers that will profit on the decline of democracy. It sells ads and drives clicks in certain parts of our media ecosystem. And yes, quite frankly, a fair number of our politicians benefit from stoking our divisions and not seeing the common bonds that unite us. And I'll tell you, I'm not thinking yet. And I'll tell you, when Dan and I finished this book, I was about as pessimistic as I could be about the future of American politics. But in talking with so many people from across the country in the aftermath, and my students will tell you right up here, this is a rarity. This is not flattery for the sake of flattery. This is an awkward confession. I'm so hopeful by you all sitting in the room, willing to ask these questions and to do the work of seeing common bonds when you've been raised in a political environment that routinely stresses our differences. Let the differences point to solutions that are specific, and that might require geographically tailored policy solutions. But thank you, truthfully and with all sincerity, for doing the work of helping to bridge these rural-urban divides that can be built over. Thank you.